Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level. Hello, and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing this week?
I'm doing great. How about you, Eric?
Honestly, I have been better. It seems I've got the flu, and unfortunately, I'm not alone. It seems to be epidemic throughout the Northeast.
Oh, wow. My wife just got over it.
Ah,
She was greeted with the new year, and we finally went out to dinner for the first time this past Saturday night, and she finally went to yoga for the first time today on January 27th. So uh, just hang in there. Obviously, as you know, it's got to run its course, but may the force be with you.
That's it. Lots of rest, lots of fluids. That's what you have to do. So we've got a special guest this week. We are going to be talking about emotional intelligence. So Ryan, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell them a little bit about yourself?
Excellent. No, thanks, Eric. I'm really excited to be a part of this podcast and to chat with brilliant minds like yourselves. So, my name's Ryan Mainey. I'm a leadership coach and trainer, specializing in burnout and emotional intelligence. And this whole notion of being your best when it matters the most played a huge role in what I do from a leadership development standpoint, what I do with organizations from a performance development standpoint, as well as just helping leaders be their best. So really glad to be here and to share a couple of key ideas with you.
We're glad to have you here. So to start out, let's go to the basics. For those of our listeners who aren't familiar with the term or have heard it and maybe, have heard some very confusing definitions, what is emotional intelligence?
That's a good one. And a lot of people, depending on their background, it might sound like a bit of an oxymoron. It's like emotional and intelligence in the same phrase, but it really has to do with understanding the brain science of emotions and realizing that emotions are going to happen whether you like them or not. And it's realizing that for you to be your best when it matters most, you need to understand how your brain operates and how emotions affect that. In essence, when you ignore emotional intelligence, you have moments where you go through life and you react to a scenario, and then give it 2 or 3 hours later, you reflect on that whole scenario, and you're like, man, I could have handled that better, right? So that's the essence of emotional intelligence, and it's really played a big role. There's been a lot of great topics around this, throughout LinkedIn and the social media, simply because all of our lives change so rapidly now. And so where emotional intelligence plays a really key role is in helping people understand, how can I be more adaptable? How can I lead my teams, my organizations, and my communities better? And emotional intelligence has given them a way to approach that with a little bit more predictability and much better success.
Fantastic. Yes, we've talked a lot about the fact that you need to respond rather than to react to situations on this
Yeah.
podcast. And, that's exactly what you're talking about. Take that moment and think before you actually just react. Now,
Hmm.
based on the definition you've just given, emotional intelligence, at least to me, sounds like part of it is communication skills, part of it is knowing yourself, but part of it is neurology, because emotions are chemical responses within our brains.
Hmm. No, you bring up a really important point, and it does. It starts with neurology, and what I love when I'm teaching this, Eric, one of the things that I think is fascinating is people start to reflect like, oh, I've worked with this person before, and they seem to be completely robotic and void of emotion. They just did not care at all. And then I've worked with other leaders that were incredibly emotional, right? And they think that emotional intelligence is teaching yourself to be some kind of a droid or something, which is could not be further from the truth. But to your point, it starts with neurology. And the neurology of our brains has everything to do with this intelligent design of ours. And these emotions have kept us safe for hundreds of thousands of years. And if we understand that and we understand how the science works, then we can realize that, okay, maybe I'm not being chased by T-Rexes and saber-toothed tigers anymore. Now the threats are more of, is my job safe? Am I being a good partner to my spouse? Am I being a good parent? Am I building my business the way that I need to? Or how do I bring in AI into my business, which is throwing all kinds of people sideways, right? But it really has to do with just the science of when unexpected things happen, how does your brain react and what does that do? Because the science of it proves that, all the wonderful things that we learn as we go through college, as we meet great people, as we work with great organizations, as we take workshops with Modern Observer, right? All that information resides in our neocortex in the front of our brain. But where emotions happen is right next to the spinal column in the amygdala, which is our, some people call our reptilian brain. What's kind of a fun fact about emotional intelligence, the amygdala is about the size of a walnut. And in Greek, the term nut is amygdala. And so there's actually some credence to the whole term going nuts, right? So yeah, but no, the science and the neurology is kind of the proof that says, hey, we're not trying to create drones or robots, but we're trying to say, hey, you react in a certain way. And when you do, you lose access to all those beautiful things that you've learned, which is why, you give yourself 3-6 hours or a day, you reflect back on that scenario and you're like, why did I do that? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? So instead of, waiting for the regret to happen, let's understand the brain so that we can be better when those moments happen. And then to your point, Eric, we can respond instead of react.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, basically, it sounds what it's all about is just harnessing your emotions. And the bottom line is, why does it happen? It's because we're human. We have
We're
60,
human beings, right?
yeah, we have
Exactly.
60,000 thoughts a day. And, Eric, we do talk a lot about reactions, which are our feelings and those thoughts and going on in our head, but our response is what we do about it. And
Hmm.
obviously, that's what you're working on. So, I mean, a lot of it starts with the awareness first, which you explained. And then, how do you respond to that? What are the reactions that you do? How are you going to handle that? And I'm sure that's what you're all about is how to, first of all, get people straightened out as far as exactly what is going on with them and then guiding them through whatever scenario they're going through so that they can respond accordingly, realizing that this is not going to go away.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and what once you understand the basics of neurology, we're not trying to teach neuroscience here, but we want people to understand that hey, emotions are going to happen. They will happen, right? It's not about blocking them out or being unemotional, but it's saying, hey, I know this is going to happen, and so if I can anticipate those scenarios, those situations that trigger me is a term that I use a lot. It takes me out of my best self, right? And it gets me out of my neocortex into this other part of my brain. If I can anticipate those moments, I can go through them with a little bit more intent and a little more thoughtfulness and prevent this whole chemical cascade that takes me out of being my best self, right?
Right. And let's face it, we have been pre-programmed for, generations upon generations going back thousands of years of history that our stress response is life and death.
Yeah.
That's what we were, bred almost to react to. And because of that, when we do react to stress, generally your body is preparing yourself for fight or flight because you
Mhm.
believe it's life and death. Now, unfortunately, our type of stress has changed. And when we're in that fight or flight mode for too long, that's where burnout occurs. That's one of
Mhm.
the key causes of it. So,
Mhm.
how do you recommend to your clients that
one, prevent it? And if you're already in burnout, how do you move forward from that?
Now, that's a really good point. And that's one of my favorite things to talk about, Eric, is, it starts with self-awareness, right? Everything from because I work in leadership, so it's all about self-awareness. We have to lead ourselves first before we can ever possibly effectively lead others. So it starts with self-awareness and doing just a little bit of self-assessment, saying, okay, what are those things that really trigger me and get me off my rockers, right? Is it somebody cuts me off in traffic? Is it somebody shows up late for a meeting or they're not prepared? Is it somebody that copies everybody and replies all to an email by mistake, right? What are those things that trigger you? And what you do, and when I say that term trigger, I often get that next question, what do you mean? When you feel that change in your body temperature, you feel that flushness, if you will, you feel that tunnel vision that comes in. Because what you're talking about is that fight or flight, right? And that's human nature, that's in our DNA. And so essentially, if we first start with, okay, what triggers me and takes me out of that best self, right? Gets that reaction out of me. But then the second thing that I teach them is that, okay, once you understand what those moments are, how can you anticipate them and welcome them, right? Because it's not about shutting off the emotion. That is impossible, right? But the thing is to welcome them, say, okay, these are the moments that I typically trigger. And so now how can I step into those moments with a little bit more grace, a little bit more knowledge, so that I can short circuit this whole emotional cascade and then step out of there. One of the analogies I like to use is, how can I, a lot of people say, okay, if you can't take the heat in the kitchen, get out of the kitchen. Well, how can I step into the kitchen and remain there and manage that heat rather than avoid it altogether? Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, following that analogy, when the stress is coming from your day-to-day life, you can't just step out of it. You're in it,
Right.
whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
So you do have to learn to adapt and to, help get yourself through that.
Right, right. The other thing once we get some clarity on self-awareness, then we start stepping into what we call self-management. So if I understand what triggers me and so forth, then okay, I can be aware of those moments so that they don't throw me sideways through the rest of the day. But then the second piece, and this is kind of it's an acronym that I teach. It's called SOC. You essentially put a sock in it, which is kind of a funny term, but there's this way, we have this chemical cascade. Once we trigger, there's these chemical mediators that our brain releases by design to help us prepare for that binary response, that fight or flight, right?
Yep.
Cortisol is a major mediator, right? And it's really good if we have to fight or flight because it does certain things to our body. But in most scenarios that we're encountered with these days, it does not help us. It takes us out of our thinking self. So to stop that chemical cascade, the first letter is S, which is stop. The second letter is O, oxygen. Everything good in your body happens with oxygen. When you start to deprive it of oxygen, bad things happen. So stop and take a very intentional breath. And then the C is for chemical warfare. So the opposite of cortisol is the chemical enemy of cortisol is serotonin. Now, to get your brain to think of serotonin, you have to think of a moment in your life that you're very grateful for. So gratitude is your key element there. The second you think of something you're grateful for, maybe a wedding or a home run when you were a kid or fishing with your dad or, whatever, winning the award or whatever, that moment in your life that you're grateful for emits serotonin, which naturally fights off the cortisol. And then the K is keep thinking, keep seeking information. So engage in the moment, find the information that you need to help you go through that moment better.
Nice. I like that, and it makes it easy to remember,
Yeah.
especially the put a sock in it.
Yeah.
So as people go through, now you mentioned cortisol.
Yeah.
Now, cortisol, unfortunately, has some very negative effects on the body.
Mm-hmm.
It, causes us to gain weight. It causes a constant reinforcement of stress. So we do have to keep control of that. And there are a number of different ways to do this. Certainly, exercise, meditation, things like that. But what do you recommend people do before this hits to sort of keep themselves in balance?
Yeah, no, that's a really important piece of it, Eric, is to you got to take care. Your body's just an incredible tool, and it's one of the most amazing tools on the planet, right? It heals if you equip it, it'll heal, it'll repair itself. You do all these wonderful things, and again, cortisol, the cortisol is needed for certain moments in time, like if we are under threat or stress, and you know, but to live in it, that's when you get all kinds of adverse events, right? You get increased heart disease, you get lack of oxygen throughout the important body parts, right? And so it just really wears on you. And there's this whole scenario of living in these stressful times, and it's like there's this weird American adage that says, "Oh, just power through," which is just a terrible, terrible idea, because you're just wearing down these systems to where they can't be repaired, and then you put yourself in a really bad spot. So if you create some regularity where you give your brain and your body some a moment's peace away from the things that are stressing you out. And when I say a moment, I mean just a moment. Everybody's in a different place in this journey of kind of finding balance and peak performance in their lives. I've worked with a client before that just was in a season where young father, young kids, had high demands at home, high demands at work, and so it wasn't realistic for him to take a 30-minute yoga class, right?
Right.
But we had to interrupt the process of just going from one stressful environment to the other. And so for him, it was a decision and a commitment to say, right when I park my car in the driveway, I'm going to take 5 minutes, just 5 minutes. I'm going to turn the news off. I'm going to turn on some music that I like. He was a big rocker, so it's probably something like Led Zeppelin or whatever. But I'm going to enjoy 5 minutes to myself and just breathe and just be present for 5 minutes. And just that small interruption gives his body and his brain a break to stop releasing cortisol, to think about something he's grateful for, and to change that chemical cascade before he goes from the work environment to another very important environment, which is his home with his kids and his spouse, right?
Yes. And we actually talked about something like that a few weeks ago when we were talking about meditation. There are so many people that say, "Oh, I can't meditate for half an hour or an hour." It's like you don't have to. Progress is better than perfection. If you can start with taking a few deep breaths and spend 30 seconds being quiet, that's better than not doing it at all.
Yes.
Yeah,
Totally
basically, if you're
agreed.
talking something short, I mean, obviously those triggers are very short. And if
Yeah.
you have negative triggers, what you're talking about is just incorporating some positive triggers in there to counteract them. And if you can just put a few of those in there where it just automatically goes that, develop the habit, develop the routine to do that. And, we talk a lot about starting your day with a positive morning routine. You talked about shutting off the news and stuff like that. If there's a few different things, which I'm sure you teach, that people can put into their daily life as far as the triggers go, just automatically turn the negative trigger into a
Yeah.
positive trigger just like that.
Yeah. Now, about people, that's a really good point, Chip. People underestimate the value of a routine all the time. And I played professional golf for some time, so I've been blessed to work with a lot of really talented sports psychologists, and I still continue talking with them. And that's one of the key things that is important when you get to optimal performance. There's a routine that sets you up to just perform in what they call the zone, right? Now, most Americans, we're not on, some stage or some race for 30 minutes that we prepare our whole lives for. However, the power of the routine is still really, really important. And you're teaching your brain either the right things or the wrong things, right? And so being intentional, and that's why we go from self-awareness to self-management. So once we make that transition, it says, okay, I'm going to take these steps. And I love what you said, Eric, about, don't let perfection get in the way of progress. Some really powerful habits start with very small but consistent efforts. And so as long as you're making a small, consistent effort to change that rhythm and routine, you can put yourself in a position to where, you can meditate or listen to a song, but it just needs to be something meaningful for you so that your brain can just kind of soak up that moment and trigger some different chemical mediators.
I like that you just brought up that it has to be meaningful for you. You
Mm-hmm.
know, what works for me may not work for someone else. Everybody is different.
Mm-hmm.
And just because somebody else is doing something doesn't mean that that's what's right for you. You have to find the mechanism that works best for you.
Yeah, no, it is. It's very, very personal. And, when we get into self-management, as I talked about that moment of gratitude, that becomes a really, really fun exercise. And as soon as I start talking about gratitude, I get chills because instantly I'm thinking about moments in my life that I'm super grateful for. And my brain starts emitting those serotonins, right? And so I get like chills and excitement about talking about it. But it's such a fun personal journey to go with leaders because they're not used to thinking about it. And what they initially default to is like, oh, yeah, margarita on the beach. I get you, Ryan. That's a happy thought. I'm like, no, no, no. I'm not talking about a happy thought. I'm talking about a moment in time that you've already experienced to where the second that you think about it, you feel something, right? That's gratitude. That's your brain saying, "Oh, I remember that," and it just releases this serotonin throughout your body, and you start to feel different. That's the chemical warfare that's happening, right? And it's really, really fun because as they start to search through their moments, sometimes they get teared up, right? And that's awesome. You don't even have to tell me what the moment is. You know what it is. Just remember that moment, and when you need it, pull from it, and you can really change the trajectory of your day.
Yeah, one of my favorites is just the atmosphere where you work,
Yeah.
visuals.
Hmm.
And I'm lucky enough to be working out of my home. I mean, you can see this is definitely does not look like an office. And I'm looking at pictures of I do calendars every year.
Hmm.
And instead of just using this year, a few years ago, I got smart and I just put all the last 5 years up and only the one this year that has the dates on it. So I'm constantly surrounded by that. And this could be in your office. It could be posters with positive sayings on it, this, that, and whatever. It could be that mantra that you're scratching your head to remember that's right there in front of you. So, I mean, that's one of the tricks that I use. And it's very, very
Hmm.
simple to do because once you set it up, it's right there for you.
Right there, man. And managing yourself, your own environment is just so important. And Eric, doing all the leadership work that I know that you guys do, again, that's a lot of organizations miss that piece. They focus leadership on their communication skills, their vision, and all those things are really important. But if that leader is less than their best versions of themselves, they're not going to be their best for their people, right? And so it really
Exactly.
has to start with yourself.
It does. There's a reason when you go on an airplane, they tell you if you're traveling with someone else and the oxygen mask drops, get your own mask on first before helping the person you're traveling with. If you don't take care of yourself, you can't be there for others. And something else that, we've been touching on with the gratitude, one of the reasons that this works so well is that the brain has no sense of time. Your brain
Hmm.
fires, neurons, it doesn't know time. So when you start thinking about that memory that brings up that feeling of gratitude, your brain thinks it's happening right then. And you're right back in it. And that's one of the reasons it's so powerful, because it's as though it's happening all over again.
Really, really important point. Yeah, it's and that's the beauty of how the brain operates, right? That's why we shouldn't be afraid of emotions, right? It's
Right.
just let's just better understand them and let's not let them run us, right? Let's be
Yep.
smarter about it. And yeah, and that way we can be our best selves more often. And one of the things I always try to talk to people about is how to be your best when it matters most. And when you think of the leaders who have kind of earned their salt in your past and in your background, it's not that everything went perfect, right? It very
Right.
seldom is. Really the great leaders earn their salt in handling adversity, handling change, adapting, leading teams through some amazing environments that they weren't anticipating. And so that's why I think emotional intelligence has played such a really important role these days, and you're getting so much more press about it because leaders are the ones who can be there when it matters the most, right?
Absolutely. true leadership is not simply powering through. It's
Yeah.
understanding the situation, understanding themselves and their team, and helping that team get through struggles in a way that they can cope with.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
it's so important. There's so much attention, especially in corporations and businesses as a whole, on the process. And it's like, we have a process, you stick to the process, but that process has to be there for the people. There's always a person that has to complete that process. And if the process is causing more stress than it's alleviating, that's a failed process.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. No, I love that. And that one of my favorite leader mentors of all time, and I think this is the best case for emotional intelligence and EQ over IQ. So this is what I was with a medical device organization or a medical organization, and there was a pharmaceutical and therapeutic division in the organization, and then there was a medical device division in the organization. And those divisions were very, very separate. It was like cats and dogs, right? They did not collaborate well together and so forth. Now, the CEO at the time, Tim Sear, fantastic CEO, big on training and development. And as he was developing his bench, right, his C-suite and everything, he wants that cross-pollination. Now, of course, everybody in medical device and surgical is like, oh, there's no way somebody in therapeutics can survive over here. And vice versa. Everybody in therapeutics is like, oh, there's no way those surgical guys can survive over here. And so there was this toxic environment that was going on. One of my favorite leaders, Jim Thomas, very emotional, intelligent guy. He was the next to go over. And so he goes into surgical. And then the rumor mill was just a buzz. Watch, this guy's going to tank. He's going to fail. He doesn't know a thing. Right. And so his IQ about the surgical business probably was mediocre at best. Right. And but here's what he did again, because he's so masterful from an emotional intelligence standpoint, is he says, hey, I understand where my weaknesses are. I don't understand what this organization needs. So what I need is expertise around me. And so he didn't go in there touting that he was the expert. He didn't go in there touting that he had the IQ to lead this business. He went in there curious and ready to connect with people and ready to understand where these expertise are and how those expertise are going to help us get to these areas. And just instantly built all this credibility and trust. And he created these great relationship levers around him, and then led the surgical business unit to all kinds of growth and put him in a position to be a very, very powerful executive. But it had nothing to do with his IQ. It had everything to do with his EQ.
Right. One of the most powerful things any leader can say is, I don't know, but I'm willing to find out. You have to be able to do that. Well, we are coming up on the end of our time. So, Ryan, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, learn more about what you do, possibly consult with you, how can they do so?
Yeah, it's very easy to connect with me, Eric. I appreciate that. So they can find me on LinkedIn at Ryan Mainey, or my website is ryanmainey.com. Would love to have a curious conversation and to share some positive energy on your gifts for this world and help you prevent burnout.
Fantastic. So, Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway for this week?
Well, I love the analysis starting with awareness. We talk about that every week, but self-awareness to self-management is so important. Realizing that life is just a series of present moment events. And if you can change your perspective to look at those present moment events and treat them with a positive response, that's the most important thing that you can possibly do. And if you can train yourself to do that, making positive triggers to counteract these negative triggers, that's where it goes. So it's so wonderful that you're doing what you're doing. I'm sure it's got to be a lot of fun and a lot of frustration from time to time too. But again, that's what you're dealing with too. But anyway, congrats and keep it up.
Thank you, Chip.
Yeah, I think for me, the big takeaway is the power of understanding. You have to understand where your emotions are coming from, how they're generated, and not let them control you, but also not simply suppress them. You have to work with them. And the more you understand about how you work and how the people around you work, the easier that is and the better your results will be. And that's really what being your best self is about. Improving just a little bit each day and helping others do the same. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch every episode at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.